Emma Rodriguez, 28, standing in the doorway of the Grand Oaks Country Club ballroom, watching my sister Sofia's wedding reception in full swing. The chandeliers cast golden light over 300 guests, designer floral arrangements worth more than most people's cars, and a 5-tier cake that cost enough to feed a small village. My heart pounded as I clutched the manila envelope in my hand, knowing that in the next 5 minutes, I would destroy everything my family had built their reputation on. For 9 years, they believed I was nothing more than a failure who ran away from responsibility. They had no idea I had become the most successful event planner in Portland, Oregon, or that I had just spent 6 months investigating their scheme to commit fraud using my name and business. What they definitely didn't know was that I had recorded every conversation, documented every lie, and was about to serve them the justice they deserved on a silver platter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Riverside, California, in the Maple Heights neighborhood, our family lived in a beautiful 2-story house with a perfectly maintained front yard and a 3-car garage that housed my father's pride and joy vehicles. Carlos Rodriguez owned Rodriguez and Valdez Auto Sales with his business partner Tony Valdez, and to anyone looking from the outside, we appeared to be living the American dream. My mother Patricia worked as a real estate agent, always dressed impeccably, and speaking in the polished tone she had perfected for client meetings. Our house was the kind of place where everything had its proper place, where family photos were arranged just so on the mantelpiece, and where my mother insisted we all look presentable even for casual Sunday dinners. Sofia, my younger sister by 2 years, had always been the golden child who seemed to glide through life effortlessly. She was homecoming queen, student council treasurer, and had that natural charisma that made people gravitate toward her wherever she went. Even as a teenager, she was already talking about becoming an influencer, spending hours perfecting her makeup tutorials and outfit posts that garnered hundreds of likes from our high school classmates. Miguel, our baby brother, was the athletic star who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He played varsity soccer, maintained a 4.0 GPA, and had already received scholarship offers from 3 different universities by his junior year. Then there was me, Emma, the responsible oldest child who handled logistics while everyone else got to shine. I was the one who organized family gatherings, remembered everyone's birthdays, and somehow became the unofficial family coordinator who made sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. While Sofia was posting selfies and Miguel was scoring goals, I was working part-time at the local coffee shop, saving money for college, and maintaining a 3.8 GPA, without any of the recognition that my siblings received for their achievements. Our family dynamic seemed perfect from the outside, but I was the only one who paid attention to the small details that didn't quite add up. My father would come home from work talking about big sales and successful months, yet my mother would stress about bills and whisper heated conversations with him about money when they thought we weren't listening. There were expensive dinners out, followed by weeks of strict budgeting, luxury purchases that would appear and then mysteriously disappear, and a constant undercurrent of financial anxiety that my parents tried to hide behind their polished exterior. The dealership appeared to be thriving, with Carlos Rodriguez's face on billboards around town and radio commercials that played during rush hour traffic. He would take us to the lot on weekends, showing off the latest inventory and talking about expansion plans with the enthusiasm of a man who had built something significant from nothing. Tony Valdez, his business partner, was like a second father to us, always bringing gifts for holidays and talking about the bright future they were building together. To my teenage mind, it seemed like we were part of something successful and stable. My relationship with Sofia was complicated but deep. Despite our different personalities, we shared a bond that went beyond typical sibling rivalry. She would come to my room late at night when she was stressed about boys or school drama, and I would listen patiently while braiding her hair or painting her nails. I was protective of her in that fierce way that older sisters can be, always making sure she got home safely from parties and covering for her when she bent our parents' rules. In return, she would defend me when our parents criticized my more practical, less flashy approach to life. Sofia had dreams that extended far beyond Riverside. She talked constantly about moving to Los Angeles, building her social media following, and eventually landing brand partnerships that would make her financially independent. She studied successful influencers the way other people studied for college entrance exams, analyzing their content strategies and engagement techniques with the dedication of a doctoral student. I admired her ambition even when I didn't fully understand her chosen path. Miguel was easier to love because he was still young enough to be genuine. He looked up to both Sofia and me, though in different ways. He would ask Sofia for advice about girls and style, but he would come to me when he needed help with college applications, or when he was worried about disappointing our parents. There was something pure about his affection that made me want to protect him from the undercurrents of tension that I was beginning to notice more frequently. The first real crack in our family foundation appeared during my senior year of high school, when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between my father and someone from the IRS. He was speaking in hushed, urgent tones about documentation and audits, using words that made my stomach clench with anxiety. When I asked him about it later, he brushed off my concerns with a laugh and told me not to worry about adult business that I wouldn't understand. But the worry lines around his eyes told a different story, and I noticed that he started working longer hours and bringing more paperwork home. My mother's real estate career was going well, but she began making comments about needing to contribute more to the household income. She would come home from showings looking exhausted, complaining about difficult clients and a competitive market, but also celebrating small victories with the kind of intensity that suggested our family needed every commission she could earn. The disconnect between my father's optimistic business talk and my mother's financial stress became more apparent as I paid closer attention to the conversations happening around me. During family dinners, there would be moments when the conversation would stop abruptly if Miguel or I entered the room, or when my parents would exchange meaningful glances that suggested they were communicating about things they didn't want us to understand. Sofia seemed oblivious to these tensions, focused entirely on her social media growth and her relationship with David Chen, the investment banker she had started dating during her sophomore year of college.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
David came from the kind of family wealth that made our middle-class lifestyle look modest in comparison, and I could see how much my parents wanted to impress his family. The pressure to maintain appearances intensified when Sofia and David got serious about their relationship. Suddenly every family gathering had to be perfect, every restaurant choice had to be impressive, and every conversation had to highlight our family's success and stability. My mother would spend hours preparing for dinners with David's parents, coordinating outfits and rehearsing talking points, as if she were preparing for a job interview rather than a casual family meal. I started noticing discrepancies in the stories my father told about the dealership. He would brag about record-breaking sales months to David's family, but then I would overhear him arguing with Tony about cash flow problems and delayed payments to suppliers. There were conversations about creative accounting and tax strategies that sounded more complicated than what I imagined a straightforward car dealership would require. When I tried to ask questions about the business, both my father and Tony would deflect with jokes or change the subject entirely. The warning signs were there for anyone who cared to look closely, but I was the only family member who seemed to be paying attention. Sofia was wrapped up in her relationship and her growing social media presence. Miguel was focused on his final years of high school and college preparation, and my mother was busy trying to keep up with the social expectations that came with potentially becoming in-laws to the Chen family. I felt like I was the only person who could see that something wasn't quite right with the picture we were presenting to the world. As my high school graduation approached, the conversations about my future became more frequent and more pointed. My parents expected me to stay local, attend community college to save money, and help with family responsibilities while my siblings pursued their more expensive dreams. There was an unspoken assumption that I would be the practical one who sacrificed her ambitions for the good of the family, while Sofia and Miguel got to chase their goals without the same financial constraints. The expectation felt suffocating, especially as I watched Sofia make plans for expensive college experiences, and Miguel receive support for academic and athletic pursuits that required significant financial investment. I had always been the responsible one, the one who worked to contribute to household expenses, and who was expected to put family needs before personal wants. The pattern was so established that it took me months to realize how unfair it was, and even longer to find the courage to push back against expectations that felt more like obligations. When Sofia announced her engagement to David during the spring of my senior year, the family dynamic shifted dramatically. Suddenly, every conversation revolved around wedding planning, guest lists, and the kind of celebration that would properly reflect our family's status within the community. My mother threw herself into planning mode with the intensity of a military commander, creating spreadsheets and vendor lists, and talking about the wedding as if it were a corporate merger rather than a celebration of love. The budget discussions happened in whispers and behind closed doors, but I caught enough fragments to understand that this wedding was going to cost significantly more than our family could reasonably afford. There were conversations about loans and credit lines, about cutting corners in some areas to splurge in others, and about the importance of making the right impression on David's family and their social circle. The financial stress was palpable, but it was masked by excitement and the belief that this wedding would somehow elevate our family's social standing. My role in the wedding planning was assumed rather than discussed. As the older sister with organizational skills and an eye for detail, I was expected to help coordinate vendors, manage logistics, and essentially serve as an unpaid wedding planner to ensure that everything went smoothly. The assumption was that I would be grateful for the opportunity to contribute to Sofia's special day, and that my business skills, which I was developing through part-time work and internships, would be put to good use for the family benefit. What I didn't realize at the time was that this wedding would become the catalyst for everything that followed. The financial pressures, the family expectations, and the growing web of deception that my father had built around his business would all collide in a way that would change the trajectory of my life forever. The perfect family image that we had maintained for so long was about to crack wide open, and I would be the one forced to choose between loyalty and integrity, between keeping family secrets and standing up for what was right. The summer before my senior year of college, I started noticing how differently my family treated me compared to my siblings when it came to emotional support and genuine connection. While Sofia would curl up on the couch with my mother, showing her Instagram posts and discussing her latest brand collaboration opportunities, I found myself relegated to practical conversations about grocery lists and household maintenance. Miguel would spend hours with my father at the dealership, learning about cars and business, while being treated like a future partner. But when I expressed interest in understanding the family business, I was told it was too complicated and that I should focus on my studies instead. The emotional distance became more apparent during family gatherings and celebrations. Sofia's achievements, no matter how small, were celebrated with elaborate dinners and social media posts that showcased our family's pride. When she reached 10,000 followers on Instagram, my parents threw her a surprise party and invited half the neighborhood. Miguel's soccer victories were treated like major sporting events, with my father taking time off work to attend every game, and my mother organizing team celebrations at our house. My accomplishments, on the other hand, were acknowledged with brief congratulations and immediate transitions to discussions about how I could use my skills to help the family. When I graduated summa cum laude from college with a degree in marketing and communications, the celebration dinner lasted exactly 1 hour before the conversation shifted to Sofia's upcoming engagement party and how I could help coordinate the catering. When I landed my first job at a local marketing firm, my parents' primary concern was whether the schedule would interfere with my availability to help with family events and responsibilities. The pattern was so consistent that I started to question whether I was being overly sensitive or if there really was a fundamental difference in how my parents viewed their children. The evidence was overwhelming when I paid attention to the details. Sofia's bedroom was redecorated twice during college to match her evolving aesthetic preferences, while my childhood room remained unchanged despite my requests for updates. Miguel received a new car for his 18th birthday, while I was told that my reliable used sedan was perfectly adequate for my needs. Financial support flowed freely towards Sofia's social media equipment and Miguel's athletic gear, but when I needed professional clothing for job interviews, I was directed to discount stores and reminded about the importance of being financially responsible. The message was clear, even when it wasn't explicitly stated. I was expected to be self-sufficient and supportive of my siblings' dreams, while they were encouraged to pursue their passions without concern for practical limitations. During Sofia's engagement party, I watched my parents transform into the perfect hosts, ensuring that every detail reflected our family's success and sophistication. My mother had spent weeks planning the menu, decorations, and guest list, treating the event like a debut performance that would determine our family's social standing in David's circles. My father wore his best suit and practiced his toast multiple times, determined to make the right impression on the Chen family and their wealthy friends. The party itself was beautiful, held in our backyard, with string lights, professional catering, and floral arrangements that cost more than I made in a month at my entry-level marketing job. David's parents were gracious and complimentary, praising the elegant atmosphere and expressing their excitement about welcoming Sofia into their family. The Chen family's approval seemed to validate every sacrifice my parents had made to create this perfect evening, and I could see the relief and pride in their faces as the night progressed successfully. What struck me most about the engagement party was how naturally I fell into the role of coordinator and problem solver, handling last-minute vendor issues, managing the timeline, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly, while my parents focused on socializing and maintaining appearances. Several guests commented on my organizational skills and attention to detail, suggesting that I had a natural talent for event planning that went beyond basic party coordination. Mrs. Chen, David's mother, pulled me aside during the party to express her appreciation for the seamless execution of the evening. She mentioned that she had been involved in charity fundraising events for years and recognized professional-level planning when she saw it. Her comments planted a seed in my mind about the possibility of turning my organizational skills into a career, though at the time I was still focused on my marketing position and hadn't seriously considered event planning as a viable path. The weeks following the engagement party brought increased pressure and expectations regarding my role in Sofia's wedding planning process. My parents assumed that I would take on significant responsibilities without compensation, treating my involvement as a family obligation rather than a professional service. The assumption bothered me more than I initially understood, especially as I watched Sofia hire a professional photographer, videographer, and social media manager for her wedding content, while expecting me to provide event coordination services for free. The financial discussions around the wedding became more frequent and more stressful as my parents realized the true cost of the celebration they had promised Sofia and David. The initial budget of $50,000 quickly escalated to $80,000 when Sofia decided she wanted premium everything from the venue, to the flowers to the catering. My mother's anxiety about money became more visible, though she tried to hide it behind enthusiasm about creating the perfect day for her daughter. I started paying closer attention to my father's business conversations and noticed that he was spending more time on the phone with Tony Valdez, discussing cash flow problems and delayed payments from customers. There were heated discussions about extending credit lines and managing inventory costs, conversations that didn't match the successful image my father projected when talking about the dealership to family and friends. The disconnect between his public confidence and private stress became impossible to ignore. Tony Valdez, who had always been like an uncle to me, started acting differently around our family. He seemed nervous during dinner visits, deflecting questions about business with jokes that felt forced, and I noticed that he avoided eye contact when discussing future plans for the dealership. The easy camaraderie that had always existed between him and my father was replaced by a tension that made family gatherings uncomfortable, though no one else seemed to notice the change in dynamic. During one particularly stressful week of wedding planning, I overheard a phone conversation between my parents that changed my understanding of our family's financial situation completely. My mother was crying, asking my father how they were going to pay for Sofia's wedding, when they were already behind on business loan payments and facing pressure from the IRS about documentation irregularities. My father's response was to reassure her that everything would work out, that he had a plan to handle the expenses, and that she shouldn't worry about details that he would manage. The conversation terrified me, because it confirmed what I had been suspecting for months: our family was living beyond their means, and using credit and loans to maintain an image of success that didn't match our actual financial reality.
Family's problems created a sense of urgency about Sofia's wedding that my parents didn't seem to share. They were focused on creating a perfect celebration that would impress David's family and maintain our social standing, while I was terrified that the wedding expenses would be the final financial burden that pushed our family into complete collapse. The disconnect between their priorities and the reality of our situation made me feel like I was the only person who understood how dangerous our path had become. The moment I decided to confront my father about the financial irregularities I had discovered marked the beginning of my transformation from compliant family supporter to someone who refused to stay silent about dangerous deceptions. I had spent weeks rehearsing what I would say, how I would approach the conversation, and what outcome I hoped to achieve. My goal wasn't to destroy my family, but to force them to face reality before their choices destroyed us all. I believed that honesty and transparency could still save us from the catastrophic consequences that seemed inevitable if we continued on our current path. I chose a quiet Sunday evening when Sofia was out with David and Miguel was studying in his room. My parents were in the living room, my father reading the newspaper while my mother worked on her laptop, reviewing real estate listings for potential clients. The domestic tranquility of the scene made what I was about to do feel even more disruptive, but I knew that waiting longer would only make the eventual confrontation more difficult and the consequences more severe. My approach was careful and respectful, beginning with expressions of love and concern for our family's well-being. I explained that I had noticed signs of financial stress and wanted to understand how I could help address whatever challenges we were facing. I mentioned the late-night phone calls, the tense conversations with Tony Valdez, and the obvious anxiety that both my parents were trying to hide behind forced optimism about Sofia's wedding preparations. My father's initial response was dismissive, using the same phrases he had employed for years whenever I asked questions about family finances or business operations. He insisted that adult concerns were not appropriate topics for children to worry about, that everything was under control, and that my job was to focus on my own responsibilities rather than questioning decisions that were beyond my understanding. His tone was patronizing and final, clearly intended to end the conversation before it could develop into a more serious discussion. When gentle probing failed to elicit honest responses, I made the decision to reveal that I had seen some of the business documents that painted a different picture of Rodriguez and Valdez auto sales than the one he presented to our family and community. I explained that I understood we were facing serious financial challenges and that I wanted to help find solutions rather than pretend that problems didn't exist. My intention was to create an opening for honest conversation about our situation and potential paths forward. The change in my father's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The dismissive paternalism was replaced by cold anger as he demanded to know exactly what documents I had seen and how I had gained access to private business information. His questions were sharp and accusatory, focusing more on my violation of his privacy than on the content of what I had discovered. The intensity of his reaction confirmed that the problems were even more serious than I had realized, and that he was more concerned about maintaining secrecy than addressing the underlying issues. My mother's response was different but equally troubling. Rather than engaging with the substance of my concerns, she became defensive about our family's reputation and the potential damage that could result from discussing private matters. She reminded me of all the sacrifices they had made to provide opportunities for their children, and suggested that questioning their judgment was both ungrateful and potentially harmful to Sofia's upcoming wedding and Miguel's college prospects. The conversation escalated when I pressed for specific information about the tax liens and overdue payments I had seen referenced in the business correspondence. My father's anger intensified as he realized that I had a more comprehensive understanding of their financial situation than they had anticipated. He accused me of snooping through private documents, violating trust, and creating unnecessary drama during an already stressful time for the family. When I suggested that perhaps Sofia's wedding expenses should be reconsidered given our actual financial constraints rather than our desired image, both parents reacted with outrage. They insisted that Sofia deserved the wedding she had planned, that the Chen family's expectations needed to be met, and that my concerns about money were inappropriate and selfish. The idea that practical considerations should override social obligations was presented as a betrayal of family values and sisterly loyalty. The confrontation reached a breaking point when my father demanded that I promise never to discuss family financial matters with Sofia, Miguel, or anyone outside our immediate family. He insisted that my discovery of business problems was accidental, and that my responsibility now was to forget what I had learned and continue supporting family decisions without question. The demand for silence felt like complicity in deception, and I found myself unable to agree to terms that would make me part of the cover-up. My refusal to promise silence triggered an explosive reaction from both parents. They accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and disloyal to the family that had given me everything. My father's anger was particularly intense as he listed all the ways they had supported my education, provided for my needs, and created opportunities for my success. He presented my concerns about financial irregularities as evidence of ingratitude and suggested that I was trying to sabotage Sofia's happiness out of jealousy. The accusations were devastating because they revealed how my parents viewed my motivations and character. Rather than seeing my concerns as evidence of love and worry for our family's future, they interpreted my questions as selfish attempts to avoid contributing to Sofia's wedding or to create drama that would draw attention away from her special day. The fundamental misunderstanding of my intentions made productive conversation impossible and created a chasm between us that felt impossible to bridge. My mother's tears and emotional manipulation were particularly difficult to handle. She spoke about the stress she was already facing with wedding planning, real estate market challenges, and concerns about our family's social standing in the community. She presented my questions about finances as additional pressure that she couldn't handle during an already overwhelming time, making me feel guilty for adding to her burden rather than providing the support she needed from her eldest daughter. The conversation ended with my father issuing an ultimatum that would change the trajectory of my life forever. He demanded that I choose between supporting family decisions without question or finding somewhere else to live while I figured out how to manage my life without their financial or emotional support. The choice was presented as simple: either I could be a loyal family member who contributed positively to our collective goals, or I could be an outsider who created problems and division. The ultimatum was devastating because it forced me to choose between my integrity and my family relationships. Agreeing to remain silent about financial problems that could destroy us would make me complicit in deception, but refusing to comply would mean losing everything I had known as home, security, and belonging. The impossible choice revealed that my parents valued compliance and image management more than honesty and genuine problem solving. Sofia's reaction when she overheard part of the argument was the final blow that made my decision inevitable. Instead of trying to understand my concerns or mediate between me and our parents, she immediately took their side and accused me of trying to ruin her wedding with unnecessary drama and selfish concerns about money. Her suggestion that I was jealous of her happiness and trying to sabotage her special day felt like a complete betrayal of our sisterly relationship. The accusation of jealousy was particularly painful because it revealed that Sofia had never understood or appreciated the support I had provided throughout her life. My practical concerns about our family's financial stability were interpreted as petty resentment rather than genuine worry about consequences that could affect all of us. The mischaracterization of my motivations made me realize that my family's understanding of my character was fundamentally flawed. Miguel's absence from the confrontation was also telling. As the youngest family member, he was shielded from adult concerns and financial stress, but his exclusion from these discussions meant that he had no understanding of the problems we were facing or the difficult choices that lay ahead. His innocence was maintained at the cost of his preparation for potential consequences, and I realized that protecting him from reality might not actually be in his best interests. The aftermath of the confrontation was a period of cold silence and emotional distance that made living in our house unbearable. My parents treated me with polite formality, acknowledging my presence when necessary, but clearly communicating their disappointment and anger through their withdrawal of warmth and casual interaction. The family dinners that had once been opportunities for connection became tense affairs where conversation was carefully managed to avoid any topics that might lead to conflict. Sofia's treatment of me was even more hurtful because it represented a complete reversal of our previously close relationship. She stopped confiding in me about wedding details, began excluding me from planning conversations, and made it clear that my concerns about finances were unwelcome and inappropriate. The sister who had once sought my advice and protection now viewed me as a threat to her happiness and a source of unnecessary stress during her engagement period. During this time of family isolation, I began to seriously consider my options and evaluate what my life might look like if I couldn't repair the relationships that had been damaged by my decision to speak honestly about our financial problems. I realized that my parents' ultimatum wasn't really about choosing between supporting Sofia's wedding or being disloyal to the family. It was about choosing between truth and comfortable deception, between integrity and compliance with decisions I believed were dangerous. The evaluation process forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my role in our family dynamic and my own complicity in maintaining systems that weren't healthy or sustainable. I had spent years providing practical support and organizational skills while avoiding difficult conversations about the wisdom or ethics of the decisions I was helping to implement. My efficiency and reliability had made it easier for my family to avoid facing problems rather than solving them. I also began to understand that my family's treatment of me as the practical, supportive child who should provide help without questioning family priorities was a form of exploitation that I had accepted because it felt like love and belonging. The expectation that I would sacrifice my own judgment and values to maintain family harmony was not actually an expression of affection but a form of control that served everyone else's interests at the expense of my own development and autonomy. The realization that I had been enabling problematic family dynamics by providing competent support without challenging harmful decisions was difficult to accept, but it also clarified what needed to change if I wanted to have healthy relationships and live according to my own values. I could no longer be the family member who made everyone else's poor choices work through my organizational skills and willingness to sacrifice my own needs for collective goals. The final straw came 3 weeks after our initial confrontation when I overheard a conversation between my parents and Tony Valdez about their plan to use my name and credit to secure wedding vendors without my knowledge or consent. They had developed a scheme to sign contracts for catering, photography, and other services using my information as a backup payment source, assuming that my marketing job and organizational involvement in wedding planning would make me a credible financial guarantee for vendors. The plan was to present me as a co-signer or financial backup for wedding expenses, allowing them to secure services they couldn't actually afford while shifting the liability to me if their primary payment methods failed. They believed that my emotional investment in Sofia's wedding and my family loyalty would prevent me from objecting to the arrangement, especially if they presented it as a temporary measure that would be resolved before any actual charges were incurred. The conversation revealed that my parents had moved beyond asking for my help with wedding planning to actively planning to commit fraud using my identity and credit rating. They were willing to potentially destroy my financial future to maintain the illusion of success and provide Sofia with the expensive wedding they had promised. The betrayal was complete. They were not only asking me to remain silent about their financial crimes but planning to make me an unknowing victim of those crimes. The discovery of their plan to use my credit and identity without consent was the moment when I realized that remaining in my family home was no longer safe or viable. They had moved beyond emotional manipulation and financial pressure to planning actions that could have serious legal and financial consequences for me personally. My choice was no longer between supporting my family or being disloyal, it was between protecting myself or becoming a victim of their criminal behavior. That night, I made the decision that would change everything. I would not allow my family to use my identity to commit fraud, and I would not remain silent about financial crimes that could eventually destroy all of us. I would leave home, build my own life according to my own values, and find a way to protect myself from the consequences of their choices. The decision was terrifying but necessary, and it marked the beginning of my journey toward independence and integrity. The morning I walked out of my family home with nothing but a suitcase and my laptop, I had no real plan beyond refusing to participate in my parents' fraudulent scheme and protecting my own financial future from their criminal activities. The decision to leave had been made in a moment of clarity and self-preservation, but the reality of actually starting over at 23 years old was overwhelming in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I had some savings from my marketing job, but not enough to sustain independent living for more than a few months without finding new sources of income and establishing my own credit and financial foundation. My first priority was finding temporary housing that I could afford while I figured out my longer-term situation. The apartment search process was humbling and educational, revealing how much my family's financial support had insulated me from the realities of independent living costs. Rent deposits, utility connections, and basic furnishing expenses added up quickly, and I realized that my comfortable middle-class lifestyle had been subsidized by family resources in ways I hadn't fully understood or appreciated. I eventually found a small studio apartment in a complex that catered to young professionals and recent college graduates. The space was tiny and sparsely furnished, but it represented freedom from family manipulation and the beginning of my authentic adult life. The contrast between my new living situation and the spacious family home I had left behind was stark, but the emotional relief of being in a space where I could make decisions based on my own values rather than family pressure was worth the material sacrifices. The job market in Riverside was limited for someone with my background and experience level, and I quickly realized that staying in my hometown would mean constantly encountering family, friends, business associates, and community members who knew about the conflict between me and my parents. The small town dynamics that had once felt comfortable and familiar now felt suffocating and problematic, as I couldn't escape the social network that connected everything back to my family's reputation and standing in the community. After 2 months of struggling to establish independence in Riverside while dealing with the emotional stress of family estrangement, I made the decision to relocate somewhere completely new where I could build my identity and career without the complications of existing family connections. Portland, Oregon emerged as an attractive option because of its growing economy, creative business community, and distance from everything I was trying to leave behind in California. The move to Portland was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. I had never lived anywhere other than Riverside, and I was essentially starting my adult life from scratch in a city where I knew nobody and had no professional or social connections. The independence was both liberating and isolating, as I learned to navigate everything from finding healthcare providers to building a social network without the safety net of family support and established community relationships. My first job in Portland was as a server at a busy downtown restaurant that catered to business professionals and tourists. The work was physically demanding and the hours were long, but the tips were good and the fast-paced environment kept me busy enough that I didn't have time to dwell on the family relationships I had lost or the comfortable lifestyle I had given up. The restaurant industry also provided immediate social connections with coworkers who were focused on their own survival and success rather than judging my background or family situation. During my third month in Portland, I met Helen Morrison, who would become the most important mentor and mother figure in my new life. Helen was a successful small business owner who ran a boutique catering company that specialized in corporate events and private celebrations. She was a regular customer at the restaurant where I worked, and she noticed my attention to detail, organizational skills, and natural ability to coordinate complex service situations during busy dinner rushes. Helen's initial job offer was for part-time assistance with her catering events, handling setup, coordination, and client communication tasks that aligned perfectly with my marketing background and organizational strengths. The work was more interesting and challenging than restaurant service, and it provided exposure to the event planning industry that would eventually become my career focus. Helen's business model was built on exceptional attention to detail and personalized service that created memorable experiences for clients, values that resonated with my own approach to work and life. Working with Helen's catering company opened my eyes to the complexity and creativity involved in successful event planning. Every celebration required balancing client visions with practical constraints, coordinating multiple vendors and timelines, and solving problems in real time while maintaining a professional demeanor that made everything appear effortless. The skills I had developed during Sofia's wedding planning process proved valuable, but Helen taught me to think more strategically about event design and business operations. Helen's mentorship extended beyond professional development to personal guidance and emotional support during a time when I was still processing the trauma of family rejection and building confidence in my independent choices. She had experienced her own difficult family relationships and understood the challenges of building a successful life after leaving behind toxic dynamics that had defined your identity and self-worth. Her encouragement and practical advice helped me develop resilience and optimism about my future possibilities. Under Helen's guidance, I learned every aspect of the catering and event planning business, from menu development and vendor negotiations to client consultation and event execution. She gradually increased my responsibilities and trusted me with more complex projects, allowing me to develop expertise and confidence while building a portfolio of successful events that demonstrated my capabilities to potential clients and employers. The transformation from displaced family member to competent business professional happened gradually over the course of 2 years. My organizational skills, marketing background, and natural creativity combined with Helen's training and mentorship to create a foundation for career success that felt authentic and sustainable. I was building something based on my own talents and efforts rather than trying to fit into roles and expectations that had been defined by family dynamics and limitations. Helen's business connections introduced me to other event planning professionals and potential clients who appreciated my attention to detail and ability to execute complex celebrations flawlessly. Word-of-mouth recommendations led to freelance opportunities that supplemented my income and expanded my experience with different types of events and client requirements. The positive feedback and repeat business confirmed that I had found a career path that aligned with my strengths and interests. During my fourth year in Portland, I reached a point where my freelance event planning income was substantial enough that I could consider launching my own business rather than continuing to work for other companies. Helen encouraged my entrepreneurial ambitions and provided guidance on business planning, legal requirements, and financial management that would be essential for successful independent operation. Her support and confidence in my abilities gave me the courage to take the risk of starting my own company. Perfectly Planned Events was launched with careful attention to legal requirements, professional insurance, and financial management practices that would protect both my business and my clients. I had learned from my family's financial mistakes and was determined to build a company based on honest business practices, transparent pricing, and sustainable growth rather than flashy appearances that couldn't be supported by actual revenue and profitability. The early months of running my own business were challenging and exciting, requiring me to handle everything from marketing and client acquisition to event execution and financial management. The learning curve was steep, but my experience with Helen's company had prepared me for most of the operational challenges, and my marketing background helped with business development and client communication. The independence and creative control were worth the stress and uncertainty of entrepreneurial life. My business model focused on providing high-quality event planning services for clients who valued attention to detail and personalized service over flashy excess and status displays. I specialized in celebrations that were elegant and memorable without being wasteful or financially irresponsible, appealing to clients who wanted their events to reflect their values rather than just their budgets. The approach resonated with Portland's environmentally conscious and socially responsible business community. Success came gradually through referrals and positive reviews from satisfied clients who appreciated my professional competence and ethical business practices. Within 3 years, Perfectly Planned Events had established a solid reputation in Portland's event planning market and was generating enough revenue to support a comfortable lifestyle and modest business expansion. The financial independence felt especially meaningful given that I had achieved it through honest work and sound business practices. The irony of my success in the event planning industry wasn't lost on me, considering that my expertise had been developed partly through my involvement in Sofia's wedding planning and my family's expectation that I would provide those services for free. I had transformed the skills they had taken for granted into a profitable business that provided independence and professional recognition. The resentment I had felt about being expected to coordinate family events without compensation had motivated me to build a career where those abilities were properly valued and compensated. 6 years after leaving Riverside, I received an unexpected email from Sofia that would change the trajectory of my life once again. The message was brief and formal, informing me that she was getting married to David Chen and requesting my presence at the wedding ceremony. The invitation felt surreal, coming after years of complete silence from my family, and I wasn't sure whether to interpret it as a genuine attempt at reconciliation or something more calculated related to appearances and social expectations. The timing of Sofia's invitation coincided with some investigative work I had been doing into event planning industry fraud and unethical business practices. As a successful business owner, I had become involved in professional organizations that work to maintain standards and protect clients from vendors who engaged in deceptive practices. My research into industry problems had led me to examine business registration databases and legal filings that revealed interesting information about companies operating in California. My investigation into Rodriguez and Valdez auto sales revealed that the financial problems I had discovered years earlier had escalated into serious legal consequences for my father and Tony Valdez. Tax evasion charges, business fraud allegations, and civil lawsuits from customers and suppliers painted a picture of a company that had collapsed under the weight of illegal business practices and financial mismanagement. The documentation confirmed that my decision to leave home had protected me from becoming entangled in criminal activities that eventually destroyed my father's business and reputation. The legal troubles facing my father provided context for Sofia's wedding invitation that helped me understand her motivations and timing.
Closure that might help me process the trauma of family rejection and move forward without unresolved questions. The preparation for returning to Riverside after 6 years required emotional and practical planning that helped me approach the reunion with confidence and clear boundaries. I arranged for professional photography of my successful business operations, gathered documentation of my achievements and financial independence, and prepared for potential conversations that might attempt to manipulate my emotions or guilt me into providing financial or practical support that I was no longer willing to offer.
Walking into the Grand Oaks Country Club ballroom where Sofia's wedding reception was being held, I was struck by the familiar patterns of excess and image management that had characterized my family's approach to social events. The celebration was elaborate and expensive, suggesting that my parents had found ways to finance Sofia's dream wedding despite their documented financial problems. The guest list included many of the same people who had attended family gatherings during my childhood, and I could see the curiosity and whispered conversations that my presence was generating among family friends and community members. My family's reaction to my attendance was a mixture of shock, nervousness, and attempts at polite normalcy that revealed their discomfort with my unexpected presence. My parents looked older and more stressed than I remembered, and their attempts at casual conversation felt forced and superficial. Sofia appeared genuinely surprised to see me, suggesting that she hadn't been certain I would actually attend despite sending the invitation. The moment of truth came during the reception when I overheard a conversation between my parents and Tony Valdez about their plan to stick me with the wedding expenses by using my event planning business connections and credit to secure vendor services without my knowledge. They assumed that my professional reputation and financial stability would make me a viable backup payment source, and they planned to present me as a willing co-signer for wedding expenses that they couldn't actually afford. The conversation revealed that my family had learned nothing from their previous financial crimes and legal troubles. They were still prioritizing image and social status over honest business practices, and they were still willing to victimize family members to maintain their desired lifestyle. The plan to use my business and credit without consent was essentially the same fraudulent scheme they had attempted 6 years earlier, updated to take advantage of my current success and professional reputation. My response to discovering their latest fraud attempt was swift and decisive. I approached the microphone during the reception's toast period and delivered a speech that exposed their financial crimes, business failures, and current attempt to commit fraud using my identity. The revelation of their legal troubles and criminal activities was devastating to their social standing and relationship with the Chen family, but it was necessary to protect myself and send a clear message that I would not tolerate continued attempts to victimize me. The aftermath of my speech was chaos and social destruction for my family, but it was also liberation and closure for me. I had finally spoken truth to power and refused to enable continued criminal behavior, even at the cost of destroying family relationships permanently. The choice between family loyalty and personal integrity had been made definitively, and I was at peace with the consequences of choosing honesty over comfortable deception. The wedding reception ended in disaster for Sofia and my parents, but it ended in triumph for me. I had returned to Riverside as a successful business owner who could not be manipulated or victimized, and I had demonstrated that their actions had consequences that extended beyond their immediate family. The justice I served was not revenge, but accountability for choices they had made repeatedly despite having opportunities to learn from previous mistakes. The drive back to Portland after Sofia's wedding felt like the final chapter in my journey from family scapegoat to independent success story. I had closure on the relationships that had shaped my early life, confirmation that my decision to leave had been necessary for my safety and development, and peace about the path I had chosen. The family I had built through mentorship, friendship, and professional relationships was more authentic and supportive than the biological relationships I had lost through choosing integrity over compliance. The weeks following Sofia's wedding reception disaster brought a cascade of consequences that rippled through Riverside's social circles and business community in ways that exceeded even my expectations for accountability and justice. The Chen family's immediate withdrawal from the marriage alliance sent shockwaves through the political and business networks that my parents had spent decades cultivating, effectively destroying their carefully constructed social standing and professional reputation overnight. David's parents, horrified by the revelation of criminal activities and financial fraud within their new in-laws family, initiated emergency legal consultations to determine whether the marriage could be annulled or if other protective measures were necessary to distance themselves from potential liability. Sofia's dreams of influencer success and social media prominence crumbled as news of the wedding reception scandal spread through online communities and local media outlets. The contrast between her carefully curated image of perfect family relationships and elegant lifestyle versus the reality of criminal fraud and public humiliation created a credibility crisis that destroyed her brand partnerships and follower engagement. The wedding that was supposed to launch her career as a lifestyle influencer instead became a cautionary tale about the dangers of building public personas on unstable foundations and family deception. The legal ramifications for my father and Tony Valdez accelerated rapidly as the public exposure of their financial crimes attracted additional scrutiny from law enforcement agencies and regulatory bodies. The IRS investigation that had been proceeding slowly through bureaucratic channels suddenly gained momentum when media attention highlighted the scope of their tax evasion and business fraud activities. Federal prosecutors who had been building cases against Rodriguez and Valdez Auto Sales found that public awareness of their crimes made prosecution easier and more politically advantageous. My mother's real estate career became collateral damage in the scandal as clients and professional colleagues distanced themselves from association with financial criminals and family dysfunction. The social networks that had provided referrals and business opportunities disappeared almost overnight, leaving her professionally isolated and financially vulnerable just when the family needed additional income sources to handle legal expenses and civil judgments. Her decades of careful relationship building and professional reputation development were destroyed by association with crimes she may not have fully understood, but had certainly enabled through willful ignorance. Miguel's college experience was disrupted by the scandal as university administrators and fellow students became aware of his family's criminal activities and financial problems. The academic scholarships and athletic opportunities that had seemed secure were jeopardized by background checks and social media attention that revealed his connection to convicted fraudsters. The golden child who had been protected from family problems and financial stress was suddenly forced to confront the reality that his privileged lifestyle had been built on illegal activities that carried serious consequences. The impact on my extended family and family friends was significant as people who had invested emotionally and sometimes financially in relationships with my parents found themselves associated with criminal behavior and social disgrace. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and longtime family friends were forced to choose between loyalty to people they had known for decades and protection of their own reputations and social standing. Most chose self-preservation, creating additional isolation and abandonment for my parents during their time of greatest need. The business community in Riverside reacted swiftly to distance themselves from Rodriguez and Valdez Auto Sales and its owners, canceling contracts, demanding immediate payment of outstanding debts, and pursuing legal remedies for financial damages they had suffered from the fraudulent business practices. Suppliers who had extended credit based on false financial statements filed lawsuits seeking compensation for losses, while customers who had purchased defective vehicles or services demanded refunds and damages for deceptive sales practices. Tony Valdez's family faced their own crisis as the extent of his involvement in financial crimes became public knowledge through court filings and media coverage. His wife and children, who had lived comfortable lives supported by what they believed was legitimate business income, discovered that their financial security was built on illegal activities that could result in asset forfeiture and criminal penalties. The betrayal of trust within his immediate family mirrored the dynamics that had destroyed my relationship with my parents, but with the added trauma of federal prosecution and potential imprisonment. The investigation into Rodriguez and Valdez Auto Sales revealed connections to other fraudulent businesses and criminal networks that expanded the scope of the prosecution beyond simple tax evasion and business fraud. Money laundering through shell companies, kickback schemes with parts suppliers, and falsification of vehicle inspection records created a complex web of criminal activity that implicated additional business associates and community members. The scandal grew beyond a family business failure into a broader examination of corruption within Riverside's automotive industry. Sofia's marriage to David Chen became another casualty of the expanding scandal as the legal and social pressures made their relationship untenable regardless of their personal feelings for each other. The Chen family's political ambitions and business interests required complete separation from any association with criminal activity, making continued marriage to Sofia a liability that threatened David's future prospects and family reputation. The divorce proceedings became public spectacles that generated additional media attention and social media commentary about the consequences of marrying into fraudulent families. The financial ruin that followed the collapse of Rodriguez and Valdez Auto Sales was comprehensive and devastating for everyone connected to the business operations. Asset forfeiture proceedings seized vehicles, equipment, real estate, and bank accounts associated with the fraudulent activities, leaving my parents and Tony Valdez with massive legal debts and no legitimate income sources to handle their expenses. The comfortable middle-class lifestyle that had defined our family identity was replaced by bankruptcy, foreclosure, and the social stigma of financial criminality. My mother's health deteriorated rapidly under the stress of social ostracism, financial ruin, and the reality that her husband's criminal activities had destroyed everything she had worked to build throughout her adult life. The anxiety and depression that had been manageable when masked by alcohol and social activities became overwhelming when she was forced to confront the consequences of years of willful ignorance about family finances and business practices. The medical expenses for her treatment added additional financial pressure to an already impossible situation. The impact on Sofia's mental health was particularly severe as she struggled to process the complete destruction of her life plans and social identity within a matter of weeks. The transition from admired influencer and wealthy young bride to scandal-associated divorcee living with disgraced parents required psychological resources that she had never needed to develop. The superficial confidence and social skills that had served her well in privileged circumstances were inadequate for handling genuine adversity and social rejection. Miguel's response to the family crisis was to distance himself from everyone associated with the scandal and focus on salvaging his own future prospects through academic achievement and athletic performance. His decision to change his last name and minimize contact with family members was pragmatic but painful for my parents, who lost their remaining source of pride and hope for family legacy. The golden child's abandonment of the family during their greatest need completed the destruction of my parents' illusions about loyalty and family bonds. The criminal trials of my father and Tony Valdez became media spectacles that provided detailed public examination of their fraudulent business practices and the impact on victims who had trusted them with significant financial decisions. Testimony from customers who had purchased defective vehicles, suppliers who had been cheated through false payments, and employees who had been pressured to participate in illegal activities painted a comprehensive picture of systematic criminal behavior that had continued for years despite multiple opportunities to change course. The sentencing phase of the trials resulted in significant prison terms for both men, with additional requirements for restitution payments that would extend financial obligations far beyond their ability to pay even after release from incarceration. The judge's comments during sentencing emphasized the betrayal of community trust and the impact on victims who had been harmed by their prioritization of personal wealth over honest business practices. The prison sentences effectively ended any possibility of redemption or return to previous social standing within the Riverside community. Sofia's attempts to rebuild her life after the scandal were hampered by the permanent nature of internet documentation and social media records that preserved evidence of her family's criminal activities for future employers, potential romantic partners, and social contacts. The influencer career that had once seemed promising was impossible to resurrect when background searches revealed connections to financial fraud and family disgrace. Her forced transition to conventional employment and modest lifestyle represented a complete reversal of the trajectory she had expected for her adult life. My mother's eventual death from stress-related health complications brought a tragic end to a life that had been defined by the pursuit of social status and financial security through association with successful men. Her funeral was sparsely attended due to the social stigma attached to the Rodriguez family name and the financial constraints that prevented the kind of elaborate memorial service that would have been expected during the height of their social prominence. The woman who had spent decades cultivating relationships and social standing died largely alone and forgotten by the community she had worked so hard to impress. The civil lawsuits filed by victims of Rodriguez and Valdez auto sales continued for years after the criminal prosecutions ended, ensuring that the financial consequences of their fraudulent activities would extend far beyond prison sentences and create lasting hardship for surviving family members. The legal system's pursuit of restitution and damages meant that Sofia, Miguel, and my mother's estate would face ongoing financial obligations related to crimes they had not directly committed but had benefited from through their association with the perpetrators. The complete destruction of my family's social and financial status provided a form of justice that was more comprehensive than anything I could have achieved through personal revenge or vindictive actions. The consequences they faced were the natural result of choices they had made repeatedly over many years, despite warnings and opportunities to change course. The accountability was delivered by legal systems, social networks, and market forces rather than by my individual actions, making the justice feel more legitimate and satisfying than personal vengeance could have provided. My own life in Portland continued to flourish as perfectly planned events gained recognition for ethical business practices and exceptional service quality that distinguished my company from competitors who prioritized profit over client satisfaction. The contrast between my success through honest work and my family's destruction through criminal activities validated the difficult choice I had made to prioritize integrity over family loyalty. The professional recognition and financial independence I achieved felt more meaningful because it was built on authentic values rather than deceptive appearances. Helen Morrison's continued mentorship and friendship provided the stable, supportive relationship that allowed me to process the trauma of family destruction without becoming consumed by guilt or regret about my role in their downfall. Her perspective on family relationships and personal boundaries helped me understand that my decision to expose their criminal activities was an act of self-protection rather than vindictive revenge, and that their consequences were the result of their own choices rather than my disclosures. The Portland business community's acceptance and recognition of my professional achievements created the sense of belonging and validation that I had never experienced within my biological family structure. The relationships I built through honest business practices and authentic personal connections were more satisfying and sustainable than the conditional love and exploitative dynamics that had characterized my childhood and young adult experiences with my parents and siblings. The opportunity to mentor other young women who were building careers in event planning and small business development allowed me to provide the kind of guidance and support that Helen had given me during my transition to independence. The ability to help others avoid exploitation and develop confidence in their professional abilities created meaning and purpose that extended beyond personal success and financial achievement. The long-term perspective on my family's destruction and my own success revealed that the painful choice to leave home and expose their criminal activities had been necessary for my safety, development, and integrity. The alternative path of remaining silent and complicit would have resulted in my own destruction through association with criminal behavior and exploitation of my abilities for illegal purposes. The justice that was eventually served protected not only me but also future victims who would have been harmed by continued fraudulent business practices. The story of my family's rise and fall became a cautionary tale within Riverside's business and social communities about the dangers of prioritizing appearances over substance and the inevitable consequences of building success on fraudulent foundations. The example served as a deterrent for others who might be tempted to engage in similar criminal activities and a reminder that community trust is essential for long-term business success and social standing. Years later, the complete transformation of my life from family scapegoat to successful business owner and respected community member provided perspective on the importance of choosing integrity over convenience and the possibility of building authentic success after leaving toxic family dynamics. The journey from rejection and poverty to independence and prosperity demonstrated that family relationships are not automatically valuable simply because they are biological, and that chosen families built on shared values can be more supportive and nurturing than blood relationships based on obligation and exploitation. The final chapter of my story is not about revenge or destruction but about the possibility of building a meaningful life based on honest work, authentic relationships, and personal integrity. The justice that was served to my family was the natural consequence of their choices rather than the result of my vindictive actions, and my success was achieved through hard work and ethical business practices rather than through exploitation or deception. The painful process of leaving family behind and starting over had ultimately led to a more authentic and satisfying life than would have been possible within the constraints of toxic family dynamics and criminal activities. 5 years after the complete collapse of my family's world in Riverside, I found myself standing in a beautifully appointed conference room in downtown Portland addressing a gathering of successful female entrepreneurs who had built their businesses from nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now the keynote speaker at an event celebrating women who had overcome adversity to achieve financial independence and professional recognition. The audience included women who had escaped abusive relationships, overcome poverty, survived family rejection, and built companies that employed dozens of people while contributing positively to their communities. My speech that day focused on the importance of building authentic success rather than chasing appearances and the courage required to walk away from toxic relationships even when they provide financial security or social status. The message resonated deeply with women who had faced similar choices between comfort and integrity, between family loyalty and personal safety. The standing ovation I received felt more meaningful than any family approval I had ever sought because it came from people who understood the true cost of choosing authenticity over convenience. After the event, I was approached by a young woman named Maria Santos who reminded me powerfully of myself at 23. She had recently left her family's restaurant business after discovering that her father and uncles were using the establishment to launder money for local criminal organizations. Like me, she had been expected to provide organizational skills and business acumen to support illegal activities, and like me, she had chosen to walk away rather than become complicit in criminal behavior that violated her values and could destroy her future. Maria's story was both heartbreakingly familiar and uniquely her own. She had grown up in a tight-knit Mexican-American family where loyalty and respect for elders were paramount values, making her decision to expose her family's criminal activities even more culturally complex than my own experience had been. The expectations for daughters in her community included not only supporting family businesses but maintaining silence about family problems that could bring shame or legal consequences to the extended family network. Her courage in walking away from financial security and cultural belonging to report money laundering activities to federal authorities had resulted in the prosecution of several family members and the destruction of relationships that had defined her identity since childhood. The parallels to my own experience were striking, but Maria's situation also highlighted how cultural and economic factors could make the choice between integrity and family loyalty even more difficult and isolating than I had realized. Our conversation that day led to an ongoing mentorship relationship that became one of the most rewarding aspects of my success in Portland. Maria's intelligence, work ethic, and ethical standards reminded me of the person I had been before my family's betrayal had forced me to develop the toughness and independence that characterized my adult personality. Helping her navigate the transition from family rejection to professional success allowed me to process my own experiences while contributing positively to someone else's recovery and growth. Maria's background in restaurant management and food service operations complemented my event planning expertise in ways that created natural collaboration opportunities. We began working together on events that required both catering coordination and venue management, combining our skills to offer clients comprehensive service packages that were more convenient and cost-effective than hiring multiple vendors. The partnership evolved gradually from mentorship to business collaboration as Maria's confidence and capabilities developed. The success of our collaborative projects led to the expansion of Perfectly Planned Events into a full-service event management company that employed a team of 12 people and served clients throughout the Pacific Northwest. The growth was carefully managed to maintain the ethical standards and personalized service that had distinguished my original business model, while adding capabilities that allowed us to handle larger and more complex celebrations. The company's reputation for integrity and excellence attracted clients who valued authenticity over flashy presentations and substance over superficial appearances. Our team included several other women who had overcome significant personal challenges to build successful careers in the hospitality and event planning industries. The shared experience of adversity and resilience created a workplace culture that was both professionally ambitious and personally supportive, allowing employees to balance career success with authentic relationships and personal values. The company became known not only for exceptional event planning but for its positive impact on employees and the broader community. The financial success of Perfectly Planned Events allowed me to establish a scholarship fund for young women who were pursuing education or career training after leaving toxic family situations. The Emma Rodriguez Foundation provided not only financial support but mentorship and career guidance for women who were building independent lives after experiencing family rejection, abuse, or exploitation. The program connected scholarship recipients with successful businesswomen who could provide practical advice and emotional support during their transition to independence. Working with scholarship recipients reinforced my understanding of how common family exploitation and financial abuse actually were, particularly for young women who were expected to sacrifice their own ambitions to support family businesses or care for family members. Many of the women in our program had experienced situations similar to mine, where their organizational skills and work ethic were valued but their opinions and boundaries were ignored or dismissed. The patterns of exploitation were remarkably consistent across different cultural backgrounds and economic circumstances. The Foundation's work also revealed how difficult it could be for young women to recognize exploitation when it was disguised as family loyalty or cultural tradition. Many scholarship recipients had spent years believing that their discomfort with family expectations was evidence of selfishness or ingratitude rather than legitimate concerns about being used or manipulated. The normalization of sacrifice and silence within family systems made it challenging for women to trust their instincts about unhealthy dynamics or
seek help when they needed to establish boundaries. My own healing process continued through my work with the Foundation and my ongoing relationship with Helen Morrison, who had become like a mother to me in ways that my biological mother had never achieved. Helen's unconditional support and guidance had provided the stable foundation that allowed me to build authentic relationships and professional success without the defensive strategies that had been necessary during my early years of independence. Her model of mentorship and generous support influenced my approach to helping other women navigate similar challenges. The contrast between Helen's nurturing leadership style and my father's controlling and exploitative approach to family relationships became more apparent as I gained experience mentoring other women who were recovering from toxic family dynamics.
Helen's support had always been focused on my development and success rather than her own needs or agenda, while my father's involvement in my life had primarily served his business interests and social image. The difference highlighted how authentic care and exploitative relationships could sometimes appear similar on the surface but had fundamentally different motivations and outcomes. My relationship with Sofia remained permanently severed, despite occasional attempts by distant relatives to encourage reconciliation now that enough time had passed for emotions to cool. The relatives who suggested that family harmony was more important than past grievances didn't understand that the conflict had never been about hurt feelings or temporary disagreements. The fundamental differences in values and ethics that had led to our estrangement hadn't changed, and Sophia's choice to prioritize image and financial security over honesty and integrity remained incompatible with my commitment to authentic relationships and ethical business practices. Miguel's complete transformation of identity, including his legal name change and deliberate distancing from anyone connected to the Rodriguez family scandal, was both understandable and sad. His pragmatic decision to protect his own future by abandoning family relationships entirely reflected the severity of the damage that our parents' criminal activities had caused to anyone associated with their name. The golden child who had once been the pride of our family had become another casualty of choices made by adults who prioritized short-term gain over long-term consequences. The occasional updates I received about Sofia's life through mutual acquaintances painted a picture of ongoing struggle and adaptation to circumstances she had never expected to face. Her attempts to rebuild her social media presence under a different name had been unsuccessful, partly because her previous content and lifestyle were impossible to recreate without the financial resources that had been lost to legal proceedings and restitution payments. The authentic lifestyle content that might have resonated with audiences was apparently not something she was comfortable sharing, perhaps because it would require acknowledging the reality of her family's criminal activities and their consequences. The complete absence of my father from any updates or community discussions suggested that his imprisonment and social disgrace had been so thorough that even former business associates and family friends had stopped maintaining contact with anyone connected to his name. The man who had once been a prominent figure in Riverside's business community had apparently been forgotten entirely, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of prioritizing appearances over substance and short-term profits over ethical business practices. My mother's death had marked the end of any possibility for reconciliation or healing within my biological family, but it had also provided closure about relationships that had been damaged beyond repair years before her passing. The grief I felt was more about the loss of potential and the tragedy of a life wasted on pursuing values that ultimately proved hollow than about missing a person who had been emotionally present and supportive during my adult years. The funeral I had not attended had apparently been the sparse and lonely affair that reflected the social isolation my family had created through their choices. The success of perfectly planned events and the Emma Rodriguez Foundation had created a legacy that felt more meaningful and sustainable than anything my biological family had built during their years of apparent prosperity. The businesses and programs I had created were based on authentic values and ethical practices that could withstand scrutiny and challenge, unlike the fraudulent success that had defined my childhood environment. The positive impact on employees, clients, scholarship recipients, and community partners provided daily evidence that success built on integrity was not only possible but more satisfying than achievements based on deception or exploitation. The professional recognition I had received within Portland's business community and the event planning industry included awards for ethical business practices, community impact, and mentorship of emerging entrepreneurs. The achievements felt particularly meaningful because they were based on evaluations of actual performance and contribution rather than image management or social connections. The respect and admiration I had earned were grounded in authentic accomplishments that reflected my values and character rather than superficial appearances or inherited status. The personal relationships I had built in Portland were characterized by mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection that contrasted sharply with the conditional love and exploitative dynamics that had defined my family relationships. The chosen family I had created through friendships, mentorship relationships, and business partnerships provided the emotional support and belonging that I had never experienced within my biological family structure. The relationships were based on what I contributed to others' lives and what they contributed to mine, rather than obligation, manipulation, or fear. My romantic relationship with David Kim, a successful architect who shared my commitment to ethical business practices and community involvement, had developed gradually over 3 years of friendship and professional collaboration. David's own experience growing up in an immigrant family with high expectations and rigid gender roles had given him insight into the challenges of balancing individual ambitions with family loyalty, though his family relationships had remained positive and supportive throughout his career development. David's understanding of the sacrifices I had made to build an authentic life independent of toxic family dynamics was based on genuine appreciation for the courage and integrity those choices had required rather than pity for the family relationships I had lost. His respect for my business accomplishments and community involvement was grounded in his own professional values and social consciousness rather than romantic idealization or emotional dependence. The relationship felt healthy and sustainable in ways that would have been impossible during the years when I was still processing trauma and building confidence in my own judgment. The wedding David and I were planning for the following spring would be a celebration of authentic love and shared values rather than a display of status or family alliance. The event would be designed to reflect our commitment to each other and our community, rather than to impress guests or create social media content. The contrast between our approach to wedding planning and Sofia's focus on appearances and impression management highlighted how much my understanding of relationships and celebrations had evolved since leaving my family's influence. The vendors we selected for our wedding were small businesses owned by women and minority entrepreneurs who shared our commitment to ethical practices and community involvement. The decisions about flowers, catering, photography, and venue were based on quality, values alignment, and support for local economy, rather than prestige or social status. The celebration would be beautiful and memorable without being excessive or financially irresponsible, reflecting the balance between appreciation for beauty and commitment to substance that characterized our relationship. The guest list for our wedding included Helen Morrison, Maria Santos, scholarship recipients from the foundation, business partners, and friends who had been part of my journey toward healing and success. The people celebrating with us would be those who knew and valued the authentic versions of ourselves rather than those who were impressed by our professional achievements or social connections. The absence of biological family members would be notable but not sad, because the chosen family we had created was more supportive and genuine than the relationships I had lost through choosing integrity over compliance. The future I envisioned included continued growth of perfectly planned events and the Emma Rodriguez Foundation, expansion into new markets and service areas, and ongoing opportunities to mentor women who were building authentic success after overcoming family dysfunction and personal trauma. The legacy I wanted to create was based on positive impact rather than accumulated wealth, authentic relationships rather than social status, and ethical practices rather than expedient shortcuts. The values that had guided my recovery from family rejection would continue to shape my approach to business, relationships, and community involvement. Looking back on the journey from family scapegoat to successful entrepreneur and community leader, I could see that every difficult choice and painful experience had contributed to building the resilience, wisdom, and compassion that characterized my adult life. The trauma of family rejection had been devastating at the time, but it had also freed me from limitations and expectations that would have prevented me from discovering my authentic capabilities and values. The necessity of building my life from nothing had taught me skills and developed character strengths that were more valuable than any inheritance or family connection could have provided. The justice that had eventually been served to my family was more comprehensive and lasting than anything I could have achieved through personal revenge or vindictive actions. Their consequences were the natural result of choices they had made consistently over many years, and the accountability had been delivered by legal systems and social networks, rather than by my individual efforts. The satisfaction I felt was based on seeing truth and integrity validated rather than on witnessing their suffering, making the resolution feel clean and final rather than bitter or ongoing. The complete transformation of my life from victim to victor, from family disappointment to community leader, from financial dependence to business success, demonstrated that recovery from toxic family dynamics was not only possible but could lead to achievements and relationships that exceeded anything that would have been available within the constraints of dysfunctional family systems. The authentic success I had built was more satisfying and sustainable than the fraudulent prosperity that had characterized my childhood environment, and the chosen family I had created was more loving and supportive than the biological relationships I had lost through choosing honesty over compliance. 10 years had passed since I walked into Sofia's wedding reception and exposed the truth that shattered my family's carefully constructed facade forever. The woman who stood in the boardroom of the Pacific Northwest's largest event planning conference was barely recognizable as the young woman who had once begged her family to acknowledge their dangerous financial practices. The confidence that radiated from my posture came not from arrogance or vindictiveness, but from the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful from absolute devastation. The conference room buzzed with conversations between industry leaders who had gathered to discuss the future of ethical business practices in event planning and hospitality services. My company, Perfectly Planned Events, had become the gold standard for integrity in an industry often plagued by overcharging, vendor kickbacks, and exploitative labor practices. The irony that I had become known for the very values my family had rejected was not lost on me, but it no longer carried the bitter sting it once had. During the lunch break, I received an unexpected phone call from Jessica Martinez, my childhood friend who had maintained sporadic contact throughout the years despite the social pressure to distance herself from my family's scandal. Her voice carried urgency and hesitation as she explained that Sofia had been trying to reach me through mutual acquaintances, claiming she had something important to discuss that couldn't be communicated through intermediaries or written messages. The request stirred complex emotions I thought I had processed completely years ago. My initial instinct was to refuse any contact with Sofia, as our fundamental differences in values hadn't changed despite the consequences she had faced. However, Jessica's description of Sofia's desperation and her insistence that the matter involved information that could affect other people made me curious enough to consider a brief meeting under carefully controlled circumstances. Sofia's appearance at the coffee shop where we agreed to meet was shocking in its ordinariness. Gone was the polished influencer aesthetic that had defined her identity for so many years. Her clothes were clean but clearly inexpensive, her hair was styled simply without professional color or treatments, and her makeup was minimal and drugstore basic. The transformation was so complete that I almost didn't recognize the woman who had once spent thousands of dollars monthly on beauty treatments and designer clothing. Her nervousness was palpable as she struggled to begin a conversation that had clearly been rehearsed but felt stilted and uncomfortable. The sister who had once commanded attention wherever she went now seemed diminished and uncertain, speaking in hesitant phrases that revealed how much her confidence had been dependent on external validation and financial security. The change was both sad and vindicating, demonstrating the shallow foundation upon which her previous persona had been built. Sofia's revelation was more significant than I had anticipated. Through her divorce proceedings and the financial investigations that followed, she had discovered additional criminal activities involving our father's business operations that extended far beyond the tax evasion and fraud that had been prosecuted. The new information involved human trafficking networks that had used Rodriguez and Valdez auto sales as a front for moving undocumented workers and young women across state lines for forced labor and sexual exploitation. The documentation Sofia presented included financial records, correspondence, and witness statements that painted a picture of criminal activity so extensive and horrific that it made the previous charges seem minor by comparison. Our father and Tony Valdez had apparently been involved in a network that stretched across multiple states and involved dozens of businesses that appeared legitimate but were actually components of organized crime operations that destroyed countless lives for profit. Sofia's motivation for bringing this information to me was complex and not entirely altruistic. She hoped that cooperating with federal authorities to expose the human trafficking network might result in reduced sentences for family members who were already serving prison terms, or at least improve their conditions during incarceration. She also believed that my reputation for integrity and my connections within the business community might lend credibility to her testimony that could help prosecutors build stronger cases against the remaining members of the criminal organization. The moral complexity of Sofia's request forced me to confront questions about justice, family loyalty, and personal responsibility that I thought I had resolved years earlier. While I had no desire to help reduce consequences for family members who had made consistently harmful choices, the information about human trafficking involved victims who deserved justice regardless of my feelings about my biological relatives. The decision required me to separate my personal grievances from broader ethical considerations about protecting vulnerable people from ongoing exploitation. After consulting with Helen Morrison and my attorney, I agreed to facilitate Sofia's cooperation with federal authorities while maintaining strict boundaries about my own involvement in any family-related legal proceedings. My role would be limited to introducing Sofia to appropriate law enforcement contacts and providing character references that might encourage prosecutors to take her information seriously. I would not advocate for reduced sentences or improved conditions for family members, but I would support efforts to prosecute the human trafficking network and protect future victims. The federal investigation that resulted from Sofia's information was massive and multi-jurisdictional, involving FBI field offices across the western United States in cooperation with international law enforcement agencies. The scope of the criminal network was staggering, encompassing businesses from auto sales and shipping companies to restaurants and cleaning services that had been used to launder money and provide cover for human trafficking operations. The investigation revealed that hundreds of victims had been exploited through the network over more than a decade. My father's role in the human trafficking network was more central and knowing than I had imagined possible, even given my understanding of his capacity for criminal behavior. Rather than being a peripheral participant who had been drawn into illegal activities through financial desperation, he had apparently been one of the founding members of the organization and had helped design the business structures that made large-scale human trafficking operations possible, while avoiding law enforcement detection. The revelation that my father had been involved in crimes that included forced labor and sexual exploitation of vulnerable people changed my understanding of the family I had grown up in and the environment that had shaped my early development. The financial crimes and tax evasion that had seemed like the worst possible betrayal of community trust were revealed to be symptoms of a much deeper moral corruption that extended to the most serious violations of human dignity and rights. Tony Valdez's cooperation with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences provided additional details about the organizational structure and operational methods of the trafficking network. His testimony revealed that the network had been operating for 15 years and had evolved from small-scale document fraud into a sophisticated operation that generated millions of dollars annually through the exploitation of desperate people seeking better lives in the United States. The impact of these revelations on Sofia was profound and visible during the months of testimony and cooperation with law enforcement. The sister who had once seemed shallow and materialistic demonstrated unexpected courage and persistence in helping authorities understand the complex financial and logistical systems that had enabled such extensive criminal activity. Her transformation from scandal-avoiding divorcee to key witness in major federal prosecutions represented genuine growth that I hadn't believed possible. Sofia's testimony helped prosecutors secure convictions against 17 members of the trafficking network, including several who had been operating with impunity for years because of the sophisticated methods they used to hide their activities behind legitimate businesses. The sentences handed down were severe, reflecting the seriousness of crimes that had destroyed hundreds of lives and generated enormous profits for people who had been willing to treat human beings as commodities. The additional prison time added to my father's sentence meant that he would likely die in federal custody, never again experiencing freedom or the opportunity to harm other people through his criminal activities. The finality of this outcome provided a form of closure that I hadn't expected to achieve, confirming that justice had been served not only for the crimes that had affected my family, but for the much more serious offenses that had victimized people who had no voice or power to seek accountability. The media attention surrounding the human trafficking prosecutions brought renewed focus to my family's story, but the context was entirely different from the social scandal that had followed Sofia's wedding reception disaster. The current coverage emphasized the courage of witnesses who had risked personal safety to expose dangerous criminal networks and the importance of community members who were willing to report suspicious activities that might be connected to organized crime. My own involvement in facilitating Sofia's cooperation with law enforcement was reported accurately but minimally, reflecting my insistence on maintaining boundaries between my personal history and my current role as a business owner and community leader. The media coverage focused appropriately on the victims of trafficking and the law enforcement officers who had worked to dismantle the criminal network rather than on family drama or personal revenge narratives. The completion of the trafficking prosecutions marked the final chapter in my family's criminal saga, but it also opened new opportunities for my foundation to address issues related to human trafficking prevention and survivor support. The Emma Rodriguez Foundation expanded its mission to include educational programs about recognizing signs of trafficking and providing resources for businesses that wanted to ensure their supply chains were free from exploited labor. Working with trafficking survivors through the Foundation's new programs provided perspective on the scope of exploitation that existed in industries and communities throughout the United States. The women and men who had escaped forced labor situations shared stories that highlighted how trafficking operations relied on the silence and complicity of community members who chose not to ask questions about suspicious businesses or unusually vulnerable workers. The Foundation's anti-trafficking work also connected me with other business owners who were committed to ethical practices and were willing to invest additional resources to ensure their operations didn't inadvertently support exploitative labor practices. The collaboration led to the development of industry standards and certification programs that helped consumers identify businesses that were actively working to prevent human trafficking in their supply chains. My relationship with David had deepened through our shared commitment to using our professional success to address social problems and support vulnerable communities. His architectural firm had begun specializing in designing housing and support facilities for trafficking survivors, while my event planning company donated services for fundraising events that supported anti-trafficking organizations. Our personal partnership had evolved into professional collaboration that amplified our individual contributions to important social causes. The wedding David and I had celebrated the previous year had become a model for authentic celebrations that reflected genuine values rather than superficial status displays. The event had been featured in industry publications not for its expense or glamour, but for demonstrating how meaningful celebrations could be created through ethical vendor selection, sustainable practices, and focus on community rather than consumption. Our marriage had been built on foundations of mutual respect, shared values, and commitment to supporting each other's individual growth and professional development. The relationship provided emotional security and partnership without the manipulation, exploitation, or conditional love that had characterized my family relationships. The contrast highlighted how much my understanding of healthy relationships had evolved through therapy, mentorship, and the healing that came from building authentic success. The house David and I shared in Portland's environmentally conscious Belmont neighborhood reflected our commitment to sustainable living and community involvement. The home was beautiful but not ostentatious, comfortable but not excessive, designed to provide privacy and relaxation while also serving as a space for hosting foundation events and mentoring meetings. The environment supported our individual and shared goals without requiring the kind of financial stress or ethical compromises that had characterized my childhood home. Looking toward the future, I saw opportunities to expand both perfectly planned events and the Emma Rodriguez Foundation into new markets and service areas that would increase their positive impact on communities and individuals who needed support. The business success I had achieved provided resources and influence that could be used to address systemic problems and create opportunities for other women who were recovering from trauma and building independent lives. The story that had begun with family betrayal and financial exploitation had evolved into a narrative about the possibility of building authentic success through integrity, hard work, and commitment to values that prioritized human dignity over profit maximization. The journey from victim to advocate, from family scapegoat to community leader, demonstrated that recovery from toxic relationships was not only possible but could lead to achievements and contributions that exceeded anything that would have been available within dysfunctional family systems. The justice that had been served through legal prosecutions and social consequences was comprehensive and final, but the more important victory was the life I had built based on authentic relationships and ethical principles. The success felt sustainable and meaningful because it was grounded in values that could withstand scrutiny and challenge, unlike the fraudulent prosperity that had defined my childhood environment. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.